Hello, welcome to the EPG Pathshala program in Linguistics. I am Professor Ramendra Gargesh from the Department of Linguistics, University of Delhi. Today we will discuss linguistic stylistics. This module 16 as part of linguistic stylistics, further again about narrative discourse. The title is Narrative Discourse, Focalization and Narration. The main objective of this module is to give you an idea about how focalization, narration and narrators function in the novel. And the novel that we are looking at is Kiran Desai's novel, The Inheritance of Loss. We continue with that novel and look at these perspectives, examine these perspectives in the novel. So in this section, three categories of the text: focalization, narration, levels of narration, types of narrators. We will talk about these. And focalization means revealing the point of view or the angle of vision, and this has been again seen in two ways, either as external focalization or as internal focalization. Now coming to focalization in the novel. Focalization refers to point of view in the narrative. Whose point of view? Somebody internal to the novel or a speaker outside the novel. So it can be categorized into two types: external focalization and internal focalization. External focalization refers to the point of view of heterodiegetic narrator in a third person narrative, where the narrator doesn't participate in the story. Internal focalization, on the other hand, refers to the point of view of a homodiegetic narrator, that means who are characters in the story. Internal and external focalizations both occur in the text of The Inheritance of Loss. Where are the instances of external focalization in the novel? The story of events of The Inheritance of Loss are told mainly in the third person heterodiegetic narration. So the narrator is not a character in the novel. The narrator is outside, someone who sees everything and is able to comment on everything. The heterodiegetic narrator not only narrates the story, but also includes the viewpoint of the narrator on characters, places, and even on actions of the events. So this is external focalization. External focalization can be observed in the very beginning of the novel. In the passage, I'll read this passage, a brief passage. Quote, "Although Biju's letters traced a string of jobs, they said more or less the same thing each time, except for the name of the establishment he was working for. His repetition provided a coziness, and the cook's repetition of his son's repetition doubled it coziness." So the passage is narrated in the third person heterodiegetic narration, which tells about Biju's applying for various jobs and failing to get a job, but since he is repeating the application again and again, it is easier for him. In this passage, external focalization is on the actions of Biju. Another example of external focalization that comments on the cook's knowledge is, I quote again, "Foolish cook, he had not realized that the deliberateness came not from faith in science, but from self-consciousness and doubt." Now in this example shows that the narrator in the third person comments on the cook. The narrator refers to the cook as foolish cook and further comments about the cook's realization. It appears that the narrator is a know-all. He knows everything. He is or she is the omniscient narrator and knows everything about the character. And here she highlights the cook's foolishness. He or she highlights the cook's foolishness and ignorance. The external focalization that represents the narrator's point of view about Biju's earnest desire for green card can be observed in the passage. The green card, the green card. Without it, he couldn't leave. To leave, he wanted a green card. This was the absurdity. So again, the external focalization. The external focalization refers to Biju's extreme desire for getting the green card in order to leave successfully. This act of having an earnest desire to get a green card has been focalized as absurd, and this absurdity has been mentioned by the external narrator. So this example of external focalization reflects a character's aim, and it is interpreted, and its interpretation by the external narrator. Further, the actions of Gyan have been focalized by the narrator in the following way. Cheese and chocolate they wanted, but also to kick all those bloody things out. The external focalization in these lines, in these sentences, in these expressions, involves comments on the motive of the actions of Gyan and GNLF activists, that they want to retain cheese and chocolates on the one hand, but on the other hand, they want to kick all the foreign things that represent contradiction in their motto of the movement. External focalization representing Biju's status or position in America can also be gauged from an example. He knew he was a foreigner, but he had lost the notion that he was anything but an Indian foreigner. So here the third person heterodiegetic narration highlights the foreignness. In this case, that he knew he was a foreigner, but he had lost the notion that he was anything but an Indian foreigner. This is applicable to Father Booty, because Father Booty had no papers to remain in India. He had come in British times when papers were not required. And in free India, he has no papers. So Father Booty's identity is like an Indian foreigner. Now, from many examples of external focalization, we can surmise that the external focalization is incorporated in the text to focus on the characters. External focalization represents Father Booty's status or position in India, and this can be seen from the example. He knew he was a foreigner, but he had lost the notion that he was anything but an Indian foreigner. Here the third person heterodiegetic narration highlights Father Booty's identity as a foreigner in India. So from the examples of external focalization that we have mentioned so far, it can be surmised that the external focalization has been incorporated in the text to focus on characters' actions, desires, knowledge, perception, and even their mentality. Now, external focalization is important for giving to give the angle of vision from outside the novel, and it colors the reader's perspective. But internal focalization also has a function. It too has been inbuilt in the text in order to present characters' point of view. So now let us look at what is internal focalization in this novel. The text, The Inheritance of Loss, utilizes internal focalization in the text where characters' point of view is also involved. Characters' point of view about some action, place, and characters. The first example of internal focalization that can be observed is in Cook's view about New York. According to the Cook, New York is something like this. New York, very big city. The cars and buildings are nothing like here. In that country, there is enough food for everything, for everybody. From the Cook's point of view, New York is a very big city, having cars, building, enough food for all. Whereas, ironically, his son Biju, living in America, faces the reality of immigrant life in the context of the lack of a green card. His opinion about the country changes with this, for he thinks, there was a whole world in the basement kitchens of New York. This is Biju. So Biju's experience inverts what earlier was thought about America. Further, Lola, another character who is of a colonial mindset, she thinks about India as a sinking ship. So these are focalizations, these are perspectives emerging from the characters. Internal focalization has also been incorporated in the text to reflect opinions about people or about other characters. The cook's viewpoint that coastal people are more intelligent than inland people is expressed through internal focalization. The cook says, coastal people intelligent than inland people. Coastal people eat fish and see how much cleverer they are. Bengalis, Malayalis, Tamils. Inland they eat too much grain and it shows the digestion, especially millet. It forms a big heavy ball. The blood goes to the stomach and not to the head. Nepalese make good soldiers, coolies, but they are not so bright at their studies. Not their fault, poor things. The views about Nepali people are different for Lola and Nani. This is represented through internal focalization. In the expressions, I tell you, these depths can't be trusted. And they don't just rob. They think absolutely nothing of murdering as well. Now this is the perspective about Nepalese from the point of view of Lola and Nani. Now further, GNLF leaders' point of view about Nepalese as laborers and servants can also be observed in the following expressions. We are laborers on the tea plantations, coolies dragging heavy loads, soldiers. And are we allowed to become doctors and government workers? Owners of the tea plantations? No. We are kept at the level of servants. Our character has never been in doubt. And have we been rewarded? Have we been given compensation? Are we given respect? No, they spit on us. So we have these perspectives, viewpoints emerging from the characters. Internal focalization reflecting characters' point of view towards the West and the Western culture can be observed in the dialogue between Gyan and Sai. So in the passage that I will read just now, the language of Gyan shows his perception about Tenzing's climbing of the Mount Everest, which is entirely different, and his own viewpoint as represented in the short passage. He says, Tenzing, who climbed the Mount Everest with Edmund Hillary, but was made to wait before they reached the actual summit. So Hillary could take the first step on behalf of that colonial enterprise of sticking your flag on what was not ours. Further, Gyan has different point of view of the West than that of Sai. His opinions of the West can be seen in the passage when he tells Sai, you are like slaves. That is what you are. Running after the West, embarrassing yourself. It is because of people like you we never get anywhere. It's clear all you want to do is copy. Can't think of yours for yourself. Copycat, copycat. Don't you know these people you copy like a copycat? They don't want you. So in this passage, internal focalization of Gyan highlights the fact that following the West is nothing but to become slaves and to be copycats. The bias in the West can be inferred from another internal focalization of Gyan. From the text, I read a passage. Don't you have any pride? Trying to be westernized? They don't want you. Go there and see if they will welcome you with open arms. You will be trying to clean their toilets, and even then they won't want you. Internal focalization is used in the text to represent the point of view of characters. That includes their ideology as well. Thus, in the narrative of the inheritance of loss, both types of focalizations, external and internal, help in creating the texture of the novel. While external focalizations reflect authorial comment about characters, actions and thoughts, the internal focalizations present point of view of characters regarding places and regarding other people or other characters. Now coming to narration. Narration refers to the act of narration or storytelling in a narrative. In the narration, the narrative levels, typology of narrators, narrative modes of discourse, they need to be analyzed. At the narrative levels, the text is analyzed in terms of homodiegetic and heterodiegetic narration and overt or covert narration, let's say that. You could use another term for that. Typology of narrators identifies the number of people involved in storytelling and their types. Narrative modes have been analyzed in terms of showing, telling, summarizing, and comments made by the author of the narrative. Further, discourse has been analyzed to represent speech of characters in terms of free direct discourse or free indirect discourse. So let us look at the levels of narration. Levels of narration. The novel is narrated in third person and the narrator is heterodiegetic, that is overt, with authoritative voice. So the novel is in heterodiegetic narrative. Besides the third person, overt heterodiegetic narrator, characters too employ the role of narrators. Hence they narrate a story which is like story within a story. Thus it seems that this larger narrative, that is the novel, also has different narrative levels consisting of a tale within a tale. The example of matrix narrative and embedded narrative, or the first, second and third degree narratives, they all can be observed in the narrative when the cook, a character in the story, narrates the story of Sai's grandmother, about whom she didn't know anything. He tells her, I have forgotten the name, but she was the daughter of a very rich man, and the family was had much higher standing than your grandfather, or of a particular branch of a caste that in itself was not high, of course, as you know, but within this group, they had distinguished themselves. So we have a story within the novel. This passage recounts the story of Sai's grandmother as told by the cook. As the cook himself is a character in the novel and tells the story, so the narrative is an embedded narrative within the matrix narrative. The main narrative in the novel, that is the main story. In other words, it's a second degree narrative because of its embedding in the first degree narrative of the novel. The first degree narrative, the narrative by the external narrator. Another example of embedded narrative or second degree narrative is the cook's narration of his story of the death of his wife and how his son Biju was naughty in his early years. She had died 17 years ago when Biju was 5, slipping from a tree while gathering leaves to feed the goat. An accident, they said, and there was nobody to blame. It was just fate in the way. It was just fate in the way fate has been providing the destitute with a greater quota of accidents for which nobody can be blamed. He narrates the story of his son's childhood in the following way. Basically, his nature was always good. In our village, most of the dogs bite, and some of them have teeth the size of sticks. But when Biju went by, no animal would attack him, and no snake would bite him when he'd go out to cut the grass for the cow. He has that personality. He was not scared of anything at all. Even when he was very small, he would pick up mice by the tail, lift frogs by the neck, and so on. So from these examples, it is obvious that, like in other texts, in the narrative, in the Inheritance of Loss 2, we have the homodiegetic and heterodiegetic narrations made by a person outside the text, and a narration made by persons within the text. Within the text, narrations, they tell us about the backdrop, about the background, about various characters, or they could be comments about characters. And these internal narratives, story within the story, a character telling a story to someone else within the story, this adds to the dramatic force in the novel. What types of narrators are there? Types or typology of narrators depends upon the number of persons involved in storytelling. The types of narrators correspond with the levels of narration. So there are two types of narrators, as we have already mentioned these terms, heterodiegetic and homodiegetic narrators. Let us look at the heterodiegetic narrator. The novelist tends to use heterodiegetic overt narrator with authoritative voice in the third person narration in the Inheritance of Loss. This is the main narrator of the story, someone outside the text. The novel is narrated by a third person narrator who doesn't participate in the story, and hence this person is a heterodiegetic narrator. As in the very beginning, this narrator identifies the characters and introduces them to the reader. Let us take a passage. Sai, sitting on the veranda, was reading an article about giant squid in an old National Geographic. Every now and then she looked up at Kanchenjunga, observed its wizard phosphorescence with a shiver. The judge sat at the far corner with his chessboard playing against himself. Here the narrator, in the authorial narrative situation, describes the whole story from the outside, and seems that the narrator knows everything about the world and the characters of the novel. And hence we have descriptions about people, descriptions about places. The narrator's identification of the characters means that the narrator possesses prior knowledge of the character. Even though the narrator is aloof from the story, for the narrator neither plays a role nor is involved as a character in the story, but the way the narrator describes each and everything of the house, let us say, it reveals an important feature of the authorial narrator, that is being omnipresent. The narrator is omnipresent. The narrator knows everything about the house, what is placed where, about the people, and so on. The narrator's omnipresence is also felt when the narrator provides what happened with Biju in his early days in America. The narrator narrates, all the way in America, Biju had spent his days standing at a counter along with a row of men. Moreover, the narrator assumes authority as a reliable narrator based on the narrator's knowledge of Sai's age and her love affair in another passage. It was February of 1986. Sai was 17 and her romance with Gyan, the mathematics tutor, was not even a year old. The narrator's overtness and authority as a reliable narrator can also be examined from the commentary, which indicates that the narrator is able to peep into the character's mind and verbalize, for example, the judge's thoughts and imagination. So here we have a passage about the judge thinking about his wife. He thought of his wife. The external narrator is telling us about the thought of the judge. He thought of his wife. He was 1 month married man. He would return many years from now. And then what? It was all very strange. She was 14 years old and he had yet to properly examine her face. Now, in this instance, it is very much obvious that the text uses third person narration to present the story. The narrator tends to be overt, reliable, heterodiegetic narrator, and sometimes the narrator uses incomplete sentences in order to represent the character's mind. So the examples just mentioned show us the centrality of the heterodiegetic over narrator in the text. Now we come to homodiegetic narrator. Homodiegetic narrators are those narrators who are characters in the story, and they are also involved in narrating within the main narration of the novel. Hence, characters become narrators in the story. The cook and Sai are among the homodiegetic narrators in the novel. The cook narrates the rumor of the judge's past days, saying that the judge was born, quote, into one of the top families of Gujarat, Ahmedabad, or was it Baroda, huge Haveli like a place. Now we know from the external narrator and from the narration of the cook that this fact is not correct. The cook, as a homodiegetic narrator, highly exaggerates and narrates the story of how the judge was sent to England. Now here is the exaggeration. They sent him to England and 10,000 people saw him off at the station. He went on top of an elephant. He had won, you see, a scholarship from the Maharaj. The cook narrates the story of how he was hired by the judge, and now out of many servants, how he was the only one who has remained while others are no longer there. So the internal narrator is also very important, and the kind of exaggerations that he has done, that he has mentioned about the judge, it shows that he holds the judge in high respect and esteem. Now to summarize, the present module has focused on focalization, levels of narration, and types of narrators in reference to the novel The Inheritance of Loss.